I wanted to start with my own story. First of all, I'm in the Toronto train station because I'm between trains, goes from London to Toronto and then Toronto to Ottawa. So if you hear background noise, I apologize for that. Will hopefully not be too noisy. Um, but I did my doctoral work at the University of Oxford in the mid 1990s, which is a while ago, soon after sustainability was coined. And so I was one of the early movers on sustainability, not even knowing how unusual it was at the time. But I think that the one moment of my career when I was talking to my supervisor, and I said to him, "Why do we always have boxes and arrows? That doesn't reflect reality." And he said, "That's just the way we do science." And so I went in there into my world thinking, okay, I've got to learn about boxes and arrows and causality, but always really skeptical. And I grounded my own work in sustainability, which, as many of you will know, it's around these big scale problems, these big world wicked problems like climate change, poverty, inequality. And when you're dealing with such big, interested in such big issues, you realize that causality is a really hard thing to explain. And the whole notion of sustainability, if you ever read the original 1987 report from the World Commission on Environment and Development at the UN, they'll know that sustainable development was always grounded with a systems lens. So it's almost like I was flirting with the ideas in my own career. And then it was, I tried moving it forward. Everybody said, don't do systems work. You'll never get it published. And I persisted. And so here I am many, many years later, and with colleagues now elsewhere, like I said, Amanda and Sylvia are on the call. And we have embraced a systems lens. I'm sure there's others I haven't noticed yet. So that's where I start. And I'm going to just share my screen and go into some slides. This is, by the way, not going to be an entirely passive listening opportunity. I'm hoping that you'll engage. So one of the things I would love for you to do is if you could put into the chat the things that you would like to learn today. So any questions that's burning on your mind, any topics that you hope covered, and to the extent possible, I will do my best to make this at least a little bit more engaging. And there we go. Okay, so what I hope to cover today is I want to just talk about what is a system and then why it's increasingly important to study systems. We want to talk about the difference between systems thinking and traditional thinking, and then go deeper into some of the philosophy, so ontology, epistemology, methodologies, theorizing. And then I want to just illustrate what we're doing at Innovation North and trying to actually make it happen and create some of the systems changes that we expect to see. Just going to see if I can see my chat there. And that chat is covering my screen. There we go. Okay, so some basic foundations. There you go. All right, so first of all, I'd love for you to answer a survey. So if Ibrit, you could answer the survey, launch a survey. And then when we have a lot of the folks, it'd be super if you could, oh, I can actually see the poll. So simple questions. Oh, this is really interesting. Okay, we've got most people that have responded. And let's end this poll and maybe you can launch the next one. Oh, we'll share these results first. Sorry, guys, I don't know what you can see. Can you see the polls? Daniel, can you see the poll results?
Yes, I'm showing 64 yes, 110 no.
That's right. So 40%, almost 40% of you have already used systems theorizing. Can you launch the next poll, Ebert? Okay, two more questions, or one more question. 3 options.
Yeah, so basically they are
Ah, fabulous. Okay, we got 86% respondents. Let's end the poll and share results. Okay. So I'm assuming that everybody can see the results now, and this is really interesting. 32% are quite familiar with systems thinking. So some of you might even know more than I do. So I'm really pleased with that. I expect you to help me correct what I've got wrong. Some of you, 36%, have read around it, but the ideas feel vague. And 31% are newbies. So at least I will know a little bit more than 31% of people in this room. So let's keep moving forward then. And I'm going to close the poll. And thank you. And I love some of the questions that have already appeared in the chat because they are some seriously advanced questions. Okay, this is how we often see the world. And I actually stole this from John Sturman at MIT. I think this graphic's great. We believe in business schools that if we make a change in the system, that it will lead to a change in the environment that we're in. But the reality is more like this, and that when we change the system, we actually have it come back and bite us, or it has influences that we don't expect. And I'm just going to start with a story. We have systems problems, and let's say child labor is one of them. And I worked with Anna Kim, who's now at McGill, and we were looking at fair trade. One of the things that fair trade does in developing countries is try to get students to move off of the farm where they help their parents and family and into schools, and so get them away from child labor. So we think that getting children out of child labor is a good thing. But what we don't think about is the implications of having children off the farm. First of all, the parents then don't have the help they need to manage the farm. But secondly, they also have to think about the schools and who's going to fund the schools. So even though fair trade income may build the schools, schools actually require ongoing expenses that the parents have to shoulder. So you can see that creates a systems problem. But the other one that we don't think about is, what about the kids that can't go to school? And where do they end up? And there's evidence to show that when we move people out of child labor, that we can actually move people, or that they can move into other types of non-productive behaviors like drug use. And by the way, I just got a message from Anna who says that she's here listening as well. So a shout out to Anna and the good work that she's done. So what is a system? Let's start there. And this is really basic stuff, but we often think of the world as things. These are just like objects that are in a world. We're trying to say, and by the way, objects can be physical objects like buildings, or they can be constructed objects like organizations or leadership, right? Those are concepts that we create. And what a systems view says is that there's just connections among these things. And these connections then become what is more important than the things, because the things are only things in interaction to other things. And so then the interactions become really critical. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a question. Is this a system? And I am going to, I'm gonna stop sharing and see if this will work. Okay, put up your electronic hat. Was that a system, a laundry basket? If you say yes, put up your electronic hat. Okay, we got some people that think it's a system. I'm going to just call someone out. Luisa, are you able to tell me why you think it's a system?
I think you are referring to me. Yes, I think it's a system.
Yes.
Well, it's a part of a system, because at least in my house, I don't know what happens at yours, but we are always missing one of the stocks. And I'm wondering, based on my academic interest, if this happens in other houses, and I have seen that in the media. So what is happening is that we are using the clothes, we are getting them dirty and put it in that place, and we'll go for machine and washing, and then we reuse it again and again. So I would say this to me is an image of one part of a circular system.
Okay, It is part of a circular system, but it's not a system in itself. And the
Okay.
reason being is that one sock, and that's okay because it gets us to think, and that's why I did this as a provocation. It gets us to recognize that one sock might be there and another sock missing, but they're not necessarily related. And it's the connections that become really critical. And to share my screen again, this might help make this more clear. Is this a system? And you can take your hands down, by the way. But this is clearly a system because an automobile doesn't function as an automobile if you just look at its parts. A tire operates by it doesn't really do much, but it's when you put the four tires together with an engine and doors and body and et cetera, that we now have a system. And the whole looks very different from the parts. And that's what makes it a system. And that's wonderful, Louisa, that you didn't get right, because you know that most people or a lot of people in this room felt the same way you did. And so that helps us understand what system is. So is this a system? Louisa, I'm going to go back to you. Is this a system? Okay, Apple?
Well, based on your framework, I would say yes, because we cannot have an apple without the integrated parts that form an apple with that
A
shape.
whole. That's
A
fair.
whole.
That's
Yeah.
fair. But I think that most of us see an object, such an apple, off the tree.
Okay.
An apple off the tree versus an apple on the tree it's much more like an object. I'll tell you what's interesting is if you look at Apple computers, that's an organization. And an organization is clearly a system. And an organization is a system because it comprises people and teams and IT systems and all these other things that collectively work together in different ways. And that forms a system. So an object is like an apple. A system is like an organization. So we study management and organizations, and they become very central to systems. Thank you, Louisa, for entertaining or engaging with us. And to make the argument that systems lens is increasingly relevant to our world and to research. And so start with the story of SARS, In 2002, we had SARS. Some of you might remember it. Here I am in Toronto, where it was finally contained. But it started in late November, and by March, it was a full-fledged pandemic. So it's the same sort of period as COVID. We'll talk about COVID in a minute. But within those 4 months, SARS was contained. In COVID, this is 17 years apart. In COVID, it became a pandemic. We all know the story of COVID, so I don't need to tell us that. But over the same period of time, starting in the same part of the world, China, it became a worldwide pandemic. Thoughts about why it was different? What's different now in the world? And I won't ask for participation here, but there are some clear differences that made COVID much more transmittable now versus back then. The obvious one is the movement of things. Our transportation system, this is just some picture off the web, it's just to illustrate what I'm trying to say. But if you look at the transportation systems, and whether it's the movement of people or things around the world, it has just blown up. And so more people are moving more things. There's not one product other than maybe local food that you buy that's truly local. Everything involves often global supply chains. And that movement of people and things means that it's more likely that we will transmit diseases, but also that we're more connected. And we are acting more as a system. And so you can see that not just in transportation systems, but in the movement of communications. This is just, by the way, an image of all the satellites and hardware that surround our planet. And so communication systems are blowing up as well in terms of the amount of data that we move. And so we're more connected than ever before. I still remember in 1996, was it, that we had the Asian financial crisis, and we just started to feel little murmurs of it in Canada, and in the US and Canada. And now there isn't a financial system in the world that's not connected to other parts of the world. And so we're all so deeply connected. So that makes us operate as a system more like any other time than before. And so I would argue that it's much more important now for us to apply a systems lens. Whereas 20 years ago, people could say, you know, a systems lens is kind of interesting, but not necessary. I think it's very important that we look through a systems lens now. So what does it mean? I would say a systems lens challenges our current paradigms. I want to now move to this discussion of how does it differ from traditional, or what sometimes is called linear analytical thinking. So in traditional thinking, we tend to look at cause and effect. And you would recognize a lot of this. This is the boxes and arrows from when I was a younger student, a junior scholar. And we still see this very much in our journals, is that we're looking for causality. In fact, the holy grail in a lot of quantitative research is called identification. And identification is just saying, can we identify the causal relationships? And I apologize once again for the noise. I'm in the train station, became late. Systems thinking is like this. And so we've already talked about that. We're now looking at the movement of things between things. So what does traditional thinking look like? It's cause and effect, like I said. But we tend to focus on the variables rather than the whole. So if we understand the parts of a system, we think we can understand the whole. So when the car breaks down, we immediately start to look at what in the car has broken down. And so this is orientation towards, if we can model the system, we can then predict the system. If we can predict the system, we can control the system. I'm a strategy scholar, so often we look at organizational performance as the outcome variables. And that means that we want to increase performance, we'll know the variables that will help us increase that performance. And so whether it's diversity that might increase performance, or innovation, or the types of leadership, whatever it is, we're always looking at the parts to get to the whole. And it's grounded in Western science. And so Western science has very much oriented itself to prediction and control, but systems thinking is quite different. We can't know if we change this variable, how it will affect this variable. It's impossible. So we start to look at the structure and the patterns within the system. And we recognize that if we look at the whole, if we look at the car, we can then look at the parts, but looking at the parts won't necessarily tell us about the car. So we tend to start with the whole, and the whole gives us insight of what parts to look at. And so to understand the system, we can understand it through prediction and control, but we do it through nudging and smaller experiments. And by nudging, we get more insights into the system. And it's grounded much more in Eastern philosophy and indigenous worldview. And so now I might be romanticizing the world a bit, but an Eastern point of view, if you go for Eastern medicine, you will often be given acupuncture or traditional herbs or medicines where people don't really know the science behind the herbs or medicine or acupuncture, but they know it works because they look at the whole person. Or indigenous worldview that is grounded in something about reciprocity, because we have to think very far into the future, 7 generations, in order to ensure that we sustain ourselves over the long term. That is very much around the whole rather than the parts. Just realized I've lost it of my chat. So let's keep going. So you'll start to see the difference between what we do here in traditional thinking and what we've done in systems thinking. This is from my annals paper, so I can be self-critical. What we did there with my former doctoral student, He Chan Song, is to look at all of the variables that people have used to explain sustainability and how that predicts financial or non-financial performance. You can see that this is very much a linear model. It's based on historical data. All these studies are based on historical data. They model all this past work, and then they try to predict what will happen in terms of outcomes. And I've contributed to this work too, so I'm very much a part of traditional thinking. But then it doesn't allow for this. What happens if we have inputs into, this is carbon, once again, I want to acknowledge John Sturman and MIT for this, but this would be a typical systems model. The CO2 in the atmosphere, we have to take a look at the carbon that's coming into the atmosphere, and that which is going up. It's a flow, and we only have to worry about when the bathtub spills over. But if we stay within certain limits, we're okay. These models don't allow us to do that. So systems approach allows us to see things that others haven't seen. Thank you, Daniel, for the link to that article. So to understand systems, we have to understand system structures. This is a very, very brief whirlwind tour of some system structures, and there's lots that I'm skipping here. When you think about a system, actually our thermostat is a system. And so this is a Nest thermostat. But when the temperature gets too low, this thermostat will say the temperature is too low and then adjust the temperature in a feedback loop so the temperature will go up, right? And the same thing, you can do that with cooling. There's another system, our body is the same way. We end up having, when we're cold, we shiver. And we shiver because that warms our body up. And when we're too hot, what we do, we sweat, and that cools our body. And so it's this feedback that's so central in making our system work. And so there are many systems that are dynamically stable. They're always moving, but they stay within a certain range.
Yeah.
And here's a simulation of a murmuration of starlings that shows a system. The starlings are actually communicating with each other. And so what they're doing is through their wind motion, sometimes they bump into each other, they're actually acting as a system. And what they're doing is moving towards food collectively. They're also keeping each other warm with a fluttering of their wings. They're also, and maybe most importantly, protecting themselves from predators. I'm gonna stop this in a minute. So they protect themselves from predators because they look like this big blob. So when there is a predator, an eagle comes by, or a hawk comes by, the starlings actually do really well because the hawk, first of all, feels more intimidated by the big blob, but also they don't know which starling to pick off. And you'll see the schools of fish operate the same way. Okay. So some systems, though, are unstable. So I talked about stable systems, but climate is one of those. And we reach a point where it becomes unstable. So we looked at the bathtub within a certain range, it does fine. But if you look at this system, if ice melts, there's more and more dark water is darker than ice, that starts to absorb the heat. The more heat that's absorbed, more ice melts. More ice that melts, more heat that's absorbed. You can see that it's this negative feedback loop, or it's a positive feedback loop for negative outcomes. And it will lead to instability over the long run. And what we have is often what we call this basin model, where it allows us to see that a system, that's a ball, will operate within certain ranges, quite stable. This is the thermostat, your body. But it's been known that if your body gets too cold, you will hit a point where you just can't get it back to where it was. And it's really, really hard to get you back here. So you know that if you get hypothermic, that's not just about putting yourself back at room temperature and you'll be just fine. You have to slowly lift your temperature back up and then raise it to the point that you'll get back to normal. And sometimes you can suffer quite long-term consequences as a result. But you can see this with every system. That systems can be stable, homeostasis, for a little while, and at some point shift to a new regime and they become completely different. Arguably, our climate systems are facing some of that. And by the way, socio-ecological systems, thinking, thank you, Farron, is very much based on systems thinking. And it's just saying that social systems and ecological systems interact. I won't be talking about panicky. I did think about it at one point, but I don't know if I will get a chance. But if you get a chance to look at C.S. Holling's work, or you know what, I should just get Sylvia or Amanda or Anna to put some citations in there for socio-ecological systems, but they're very similar to systems thinking, but just recognize that social systems, behavioral systems, and ecological systems, natural systems, interact, and we have to recognize them collectively rather than independently. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. I think that might even be coming up soon. So what we see here is ecological systems. They actually follow some sort of path in terms of time, so, and in terms of space. Smaller systems tend to move over smaller spaces in shorter periods of time, like a breeze. But climate change or changes in the landscape happen over longer spaces and over longer time periods. And so there are actually, and there's a reason for this, I won't get into that, but systems have a natural tendency to have this pattern of results, especially in socio-ecological systems, ecological systems. You'll see this on the right side, that this is behavioral or social systems, that you can see culture moves much more slowly than does small group and individual decision making. And that pattern means that we can actually study systems and with some degree of confidence in what we're producing. Okay, what knowledge that we're creating. So I keep moving. So the nature of systems, I've taught to you about this. There's interconnectedness that matters. There's feedbacks. So the connections among different things have feedback that force things in one direction, or sorry, influence things in one direction versus the other. And I can't keep up with the chat at the same time that I'm talking, but I do get every now and then pick up stuff. But it means asking, how does this work with cybernetics, and hold that thought, because I think that that's really important. And I really do appreciate Amanda giving insights into the chat as well. So feedbacks are important. Nestedness, the scales are critical in understanding systems. So if systems, small systems are nested in big systems. So people are nested in teams, which are nested in organizations, which are nested in communities or industries or supply chains. You can see that these scales matter, and scales have been something that's really invisible from a lot of our management research, and that's something to which Anna, Kim, Mike Wood, and I contributed. But all of these means that often the outcomes are unpredictable. So I'm going to come back to this over and over again. Predictability is not the ambition of systems thinking. We don't know where the murmuration of starlings will go. What we do know is the pattern that they've created. And so what we're trying to understand is structures and patterns much more than predicting outcomes, which is a very different ambition of the work that we do in management studies.
Thanks, Bert. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so some of the concepts I won't discuss today because we just won't have the time, but to think about complex adaptive systems, it's really cool to know that systems adapt. The murmuration of starlings, they will move where the food is gone. And so because this complexity can be still adaptive, you can see organizations also adapt. So we tend to self-organize as systems. And a system that works well will adapt to the new environments. And that makes systems really resilient. So back to socio-ecology, the socio-ecology literature really talks a lot about resilience and gives a model about that, because you'll find that some systems are more resilient than others. So instead of predicting outcomes, what we do in a systems lens is try to figure out how to make systems more resilient. You can see this with COVID. What we did was address the pandemic. What we didn't do, though, is understand how some of the systems that build our communities have become less resilient. So, for example, we now know that mental health is more of a problem that's ever been before. And that's the erosion of resilience that COVID-19 had contributed to. So resilience becomes a far more important concept in systems work. Emergence becomes important. We don't really talk about emergence. The OB folks, organizational behavior folks, talk a lot more about levels of analysis than we do in strategy and marketing and other fields. But emergence becomes really important. So what is going to happen across scale? So when do teams, micro level analysis necessarily affect organizations? Or why is it that you might have very little discrimination within an organization at the individual level of analysis, but you have so few people, women on boards? And so you see this emergence that's occurring at a higher level of analysis. And we don't know why sometimes things emerge at a higher level of analysis across scales here, and sometimes they don't. An emergence over time. So why do something stick? That's another thing about emergence that we don't know. Okay, and then purpose. What's the purpose of systems? To hold systems together, they have to have a purpose. We talk about corporate purpose these days, but to me, that's a very different concept than the purpose of a system. Okay, the spectrum to systems theorizing. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but why don't I just stop sharing and give people a pause? It's been about 30 minutes. Ibra, Daniel, Yosef, and Deanna, you guys are going to read out questions. Is there any question that you think I should answer right now?
I think there was a question of Frank Lichter, if that's correct. Frank, do you want to answer do you want to ask your question out loud?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I am a second-year PhD student at Trinity College Dublin, and I'm studying strategy, specifically temporality and strategy, and how team-level systems nest within program portfolio and other management structures that at increasing scales, and how these structures nest at respective levels. Higher levels subsume lower levels, and temporality dictates the higher levels. I was particularly intrigued by your statement a moment ago, and someone posted a couple of papers about how larger scale systems may move more slowly than smaller scale ones. And you referenced that, you made some points about how that's true both across physical systems and social systems. I would love to hear more about that, or any research that you're aware of regarding, say, longitudinal studies into the social aspects of these management systems as social systems and how they nest and scale.
That's a fabulous question. And Frank, I have to say that I didn't understand that for a long time. I just knew it was an empirical fact, right? Everybody talks in the socioecology literature about this empirical fact. And it was only recently that I figured this out, and I wish I could give you the citation right now, but it was deep in the ecology literature, I think, that we found it. And it's because of actually the temporality or the dynamics within systems. So smaller systems move faster. So what determines the scale of a system? The scale of a system is actually the speed at which it moves. So a fruit fly cycles every 28 days. A whale cycles over 100 years, right? So you see larger scale systems that use resources more efficiently in smaller scales, but the smaller scales cycle faster. So what determines the scale? It's a temporality within the scale. And that temporality, as it cycles, as birth and death happen, actually build the stability of the system right above it. So what eats? Fruit flies, it's birds. Birds actually cycle more slowly. And that scale is actually determined by the temporality of cycling within that scale. And so the temporality within a scale is similar. And that allows that system to be stable within that scale. Temporality slows down at a higher scale, and that allows stability within that scale. And so then they have these scales that emerge, and that's all based on the cycling within the scale. I hope that's clear. And so if the cycling is going faster versus going slower, that keeps the whole system stable. And what's been really interesting more recently is that we're seeing very large organizations, Walmart, Amazon, Apple, that have a very short-term perspective, and they're trying to cycle very fast, and yet they're creating instability in the organizations that are smaller. And so what we need is SMEs, entrepreneurial organizations, to cycle faster and operate at a certain small scale, and then large organizations to provide a stability and move much more slowly. But that's not the way that we are building organizations. And that's partly, I didn't get a chance to read the question, but partly why capitalism is in itself unstable, because capitalism is fostering big organizations, global organizations, and short-term organizations, which is exactly the opposite of what we need for resilient and stable systems. And that's why I'm such a strong advocate of studying systems from a management perspective, because then I think we can start to build more resilient, stable systems, which is what we should look for, not just high organizational performance. Okay, I'm going to keep going though. That was a fantastic question, Frank, and I'll pause every now and then, so at least I get a little bit of a break as well. So, okay, moving on. I'm going to share my screen again. And keep on posting your questions, because my informants in this talk will pick out the questions that they'll pose. Okay, the spectrum. My chat open again. Okay, spectrum to systems theorizing. And I have to admit that I didn't really fully understand this until more recently. Somebody asked about cybernetics. Oh, and I just see systems dynamics. So this is going to be relevant to the next conversation. There's a spectrum to systems theorizing, from positivism to constructivism on the right. Okay, so what is that? So we know that management theory as it currently sits tends to be quite linear and analytical. So we're looking for a right problem, and we're looking for the single best answer. And I've told you this already, we often model very static approaches to systems, to our research. And you know that most of management does that, at least strategy and marketing, I don't know, OB, a lot of us take a very positivist orientation. Not all of us, but at least a lot of the birthing of management studies came from a positivist orientation. And that has actually led to this group, this category that I'm calling hard systems, but it's also Peter Checkland uses this terminology. So I don't know how pervasive it is, but it's finding the right problem, and we're trying to optimize for that right problem. So we have usually an answer, but many answers, many possible answers. It recognizes dynamics of the system, and you can see that with the bathtub model. Tends to still have a very strong orientation towards science. And you can see this happening a lot in the engineering and operations fields. So I'm going to talk about one of my colleagues, and I won't name him out, but we were giving a seminar using a systems lens, and he wanted to show carbon footprints through life cycle analysis. And so he thinks that we can map a system and show carbon at each stage of the process. Whereas I'm saying, no, I don't think so, because that's asking for a level of precision that I don't think necessarily applies. So what am I? I'm a soft systems theorist. I believe that there's many problems and there's many answers. I'll tell you why in a minute. I also believe in dynamism, but I think that you can't ever know the answer. So you have to know the range of possibilities. And that requires participatory methods, so qualitative methods often. And if you know what I mean by acupuncture or experiments or nudges, that takes, I can't possibly know where carbon is fully emitted. I can't possibly model the system because life cycle analysis assumes a certain degree of static, but there's always movement. So sometimes I need to make small experiments or nudges to understand how the system really works, where carbon is really being emitted. You see a lot more of this in disciplines like politics or anthropology, that they take a more soft systems lenses. I'm going to spend some time unpacking some of that. Okay, so I just want to say though, most of the research and management is on the left side, and the ontologies, epistemologies, theories, methodologies have really not penetrated management. So the fact that we have 217 people, we just lost one while I was talking, at this in this call suggests that there is a real appetite now to understand how we can apply this to management studies. So I want to talk to you a little bit about hard approaches, systems theorizing. This would be a typical hard approach, and that's the type of models. I think someone mentioned at some point in the chat causal loop mapping. This is the sort of thing that we do in causal loop mapping. So you have reinforcing loops. That means that it's a positive feedback. Either it's going to be, this is what I was telling you about earlier, ice area, the reflection of radiation that reduces absorption of color. And so this is a negative impact, but reinforces itself. Balancing is where you say that if temperature increases, we can mitigate some of that temperature, and so have a balancing loop. So we try to figure out balancing loops and reinforcing loops. And there's wonderful papers in this, in management studies, so recognizing the management scholar. We have Perlot's paper, which is in 2002, and they talk about the speed trap, and that how once you get into the speed trap, it's sometimes hard for organizations to exit. And that showed that we can explain a speed trap through this sort of hard systems type mapping. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of an approach like this? I'm going to just show you this through a video. And I have to say, I saw this video a couple of years ago, maybe, and I didn't even notice that was on the three-body problem, the book, and now the series that some of you might be watching on Netflix. But it shows you why, in my view, the limitations of hard systems, and recognizing that I have a belief system or an agenda on this. So let me get to Zoom or to here, and we will do this and this.
If it's meant to have a sound, we don't have it.
I'm sorry, did you, Taiwa, you said that we don't have sound? You don't have sound?
No, we don't.
Oh.
Tima, we
So
may
when-
need to share your audio. I might only be playing into your earbuds right now.
So when you're
Okay,
sharing,
so that's in Zoom. And then I need to, where's my Zoom screen though? I have to stop sharing. I'm gonna stop sharing. And then I'm gonna get to my audio. And so I do the same as systems then? No, I do.
yeah, system sound.
Let's,
Or
I'm gonna play the video and you tell me if you can hear this. If not, it's not critical. Did you hear something? No?
no.
Let's try one more.
When you
Speakers,
when you
you
hit
guys
share
my
screen,
brain station. Can you
there's
hear
a
me?
select button down there.
Oh,
We
you
can
know
hear-
what? Just a second, let's try this. If I was smarter, I tend to get overstimulated like a lot of us. Can you hear it?
No.
You're not
So
sharing your screen at the
Can you hear
moment.
it?
Once you hit the
I'm hearing
share
it.
screen, it's going to give you a button, I think in the bottom right or left corner of your screen where it
Let's
says
try this right now. Let me try something. No,
no, but you're not sharing your screen.
no, I'm just playing the video until one more try. Still coming into my headphones. So what are you saying I needed to do, Dan?
There is
When
also
you're sharing,
yeah.
captions on the video, Tima. So maybe we can just watch what is being said. I don't know if the sound is necessary.
Okay, it's really
Yeah, the captions are
the
great.
captions are fine.
So
I think it's my AirPods. You know what I am gonna do though? I'm gonna try one more thing. Get rid of my AirPods for the moment. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Try
hear
one
you.
more time.
Shockingly, in about
Can you hear something?
Yes,
Okay.
now we hear.
Okay, so I'm going to now share my screen. And away we go again. I'm gonna go back to the beginning. Away we go.
in 2009, two researchers ran a simple experiment. They took everything we know about our solar system and calculated where every planet would be up to 5 billion years in the future. To do so, they ran over 2,000 numerical simulations with the same exact initial conditions, except for one difference: the distance between Mercury and the Sun, modified by less than a millimeter from one simulation to the next. Shockingly, in about 1% of their simulations, Mercury's orbit changed so drastically that it could plunge into the Sun or collide with Venus. Worse yet, in one simulation, it destabilized the entire inner solar system. This was no error. The astonishing variety in results reveals the truth that our solar system may be much less stable than it seems. Astrophysicists refer to this astonishing property of gravitational systems as the n-body problem. While we have equations that can completely predict the motions of two gravitating masses, our analytical tools fall short when faced with more populated systems. It's actually impossible to write down all the terms of a general formula that can exactly describe the motion of three or more gravitating objects. Why? The issue lies in how many unknown variables an n-body system contains. Thanks to Isaac Newton, we can write a set of equations to describe the gravitational force acting between bodies. However, when trying to find a general solution for the unknown variables in these equations, we're faced with a mathematical constraint. For each unknown, there must be at least one equation that independently describes it. Initially, a two-body system appears to have more unknown variables for position and velocity than equations of motion. However, there's a trick. Consider the relative position and velocity of the two bodies with respect to the center of gravity of the system. This reduces the number of unknowns and leaves us with a solvable system. With three or more orbiting objects in the picture, everything gets messier. Even with the same mathematical trick of considering relative motions, we're left with more unknowns than equations describing them. There are simply too many variables for this system of equations to be untangled into a general solution.
Okay, I'm gonna put my AirPods back in so you don't have as much noise. And so now I have to. Oops, can you guys hear me through my AirPods now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now I gotta go back to my slideshow. There we go. Okay, so that's to me. I'm not seeing you guys. So okay, I'm not seeing you. So what have I got? Am I still sharing? I'm not sharing my screen, I don't think. So I just wanted to say though, to me, that's one of the issues with a hard systems lens is that we try to model the system, but the system is so complex and it becomes very difficult to model. So to me, that's a huge weakness in a hard systems lens or a hard systems approach. Okay, so, and we can see this. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, you're seeing my screen. This is just something I picked up off the web. It doesn't really matter. But you can see that this is what causal loop modeling will give us. Causal loop modeling of a bridge project. You can see that we have labor market development, agricultural development, taxes. And I'm thinking, I don't even know where to look in this, much less what is it telling me? And so this is where I feel I've become much more of a soft systems theorist, because systems dynamics, I think, can only take us so far. And I can go into other reasons as well why I find hard systems approaches somewhat difficult to work with. But let's just go with the fact that the level of complexity with hard systems dynamics is problematic. Okay. And if you think that the mathematics behind natural systems is difficult, what about when you include people, human systems? And this is just fun, but this is just a cartoon. I've got a stock here that could really excel. Sell. This is madness. I can't take this anymore. Goodbye. Bye. You can see that we have these contagions in reality. And so how can we possibly model that? And if we can at least know that gravity has a certain velocity and mass that can help us predict from it, we certainly, I don't think, can predict human behavior. Okay, so let's keep going. And I love this simulation that was done once again out of MIT. John Sterman's a hero of mine, but he does hard systems anyways. But for those of you who follow the MIT group, I'd say Peter Senge is more of a soft systems person and John Sterman's a hard systems guy. But they have this wonderful simulation. It's called the En-ROAD simulation. And I'm just going to go back to my... I want to just show you the simulation. So simulation, but what we do, sorry, I was playing with this earlier today. So what you'll see on the, this one? No, I've got too many screens open on my little screen. Okay, so 3.3 degrees is where we would be in 2100. That's a baseline scenario. And there at 3.3 degrees, we're basically extinct. It's too much for our system to take. And what they've done is fabulous programming to use these levers and say, well, if we were completely energy efficient and had complete electrification, we would only have 2.9 degrees. That's in buildings and electricity. And then we had transportation. And so you can see that buildings and industry and transportation, what each one will do. You can see where I'm going with this. The specifics aren't important. And everybody says, oh, let's just plant more trees. Well, trees will only reduce temperature over the next 80 years by only 0.1 degree. Really powerful, very seductive. And yet, what happens when all of a sudden we end up with GM, Ford, BMW, of course you have Tesla already, all having electric cars. We're not going to have as much in the transportation field, but then we also have everybody moving, let's say, to e-bikes, so micro mobility. We don't know about human behavior and how that will change the system. So this might give us a model as it is today. It won't tell us the way that people will move into the future. And so this is very problematic if we're trying to use it to predict the future. Going back to my slideshow. So hard systems dynamics, it's really systems dynamics. And I know I saw that in the chat at one point, that systems dynamics is the way that we often think about systems. That's cybernetics. That's the things that we often talk about with systems. And that's why a lot of people say, systems work, that's too complex. I am advocating for systems thinking, which is different. And I would say that's more of the epistemology. got 30 more minutes. This paper, if you know it, won the Best Paper Prize. I was really pleased to be actually on the committee at that time. And to me, it was a game changer. It's by Plowman et al. In AMJ 2007. And what they do is talk about a church. I think they called it Mission Church. Mission Church was only giving, had fewer and fewer people that were showing up at church. So the same thing that happens today in the Western world. And then all of a sudden things changed. And it was so full, the church at some point, that they didn't even have chairs. And it was after breakfast was being offered to homeless people. That became a tipping point. Now, they didn't try to model it. What they did was recognize that there was a tipping point. And so in soft systems thinking, what we do is try to understand the structure of systems. All of those system structures that I told you about, but we don't try to model them. We try to use that as a heuristic in understanding what's going on in the systems that we have. Okay, so Donella Meadows wrote this in 2008, Thinking in Systems, absolutely fabulous. Once again, she's out of MIT, and she also, her and her husband wrote Limits to Growth, and that was also a very systems-oriented piece. And the iceberg model is really important. Now, this will show you that soft system, we think about events, but there's also patterns of behaviors, system structures, and mental models that we can't model. But there's lots of things, in other words, that we can't see. And so a soft systems lens says that there's things that we cannot see. We can only see the events. But let us at least recognize that there's things that we can't see and have that help us anticipate what those patterns and structures are, so we can start nudging or moving the system in the way that we want. Many of you would have seen this. I'm not going to explain it in detail, but it's an elephant. You have many people looking at different parts of the elephant. You have a guy who's looking at the tusk, thinks it's a spear, the trunk thinks it's a snake, etc. You all see different parts of the system. This is an important metaphor. If we see different parts of the system, then you know that no one person understands the system. So to understand system, like systems thinking, you have to have multiple people engaged in the activity to illustrate parts of the system we don't see. And a really big movement these days has been in recognizing the importance of the invisible folks, the silent folks, the people who are missing, that are in that should affect what we do in management studies, but don't include it. And that's because it's important to include them, because right now we're only seeing part of organizations. We're missing a huge part of the people that are maybe the majority of people, but are invisible. We didn't give women a voice in systems a lot of the time. We didn't give people of color a voice. We didn't give Indigenous people a voice. So yet they're part of our system, and they matter as much as the traditional people with power. There's another thing that's important in soft systems, and that we can look at the same thing and see something different. This person might be seeing a spear. Another person may have seen a tusk. Another person might have seen a horn. So when you have 3 people or 4 people, this person sees an M, this person sees an E, this person sees a W, this person sees a 3. We all see different things. And so understanding different perspectives become important. So epistemology matters. And so whereas the system, we all see different parts of the system from an ontological perspective, we all have different opinions of what we see as well. And so I think that those 2 points of view are really important. Okay, so how do you research through a soft systems lens? I believe that scholarship needs to be really engaged. You have to understand the system structure. You need deep observations. You have to really get inside the system. You need to take different perspectives. So the way I've said, you can't know the system until sometimes you nudge the system, because the relationship between me and Deanna, let's say, nobody would know until they start poking at the system and they realize I do, let's say, have a relationship with Deanna, or I don't. And so nudging the system reveals relationships that are often missing. And we need multi-level across different scales and longitudinal across time insights. Okay. Frank is asking for my email address. Okay, someone can give that. It's on my very last slide, Frank. You can have to stay till the end. So important paradigmatic differences between the two, and I'm going to run out of time if I go this slow. So, thank you, Elise. I told you I had really cool people on this call that I know. Elise is a postdoc that works for me right now and is going to go to IATA in a couple of months, so we're going to miss her. Paradigmatic differences, prediction and control versus unpredictability and uncontrollability. We've talked about analytical thinking tends to rely on past data. In fact, once it becomes data, it's often the past, whereas systems thinkers recognize we learn from the past, we live in the present, but it's the future that we really focus on. Static versus dynamic is different. Disciplinarity, purity, and traditional thinking, we want to work within a discipline. In systems thinking, we actually value interdisciplinarity. We tend to be more problem focused rather than discipline focused. We tend to, in traditional thinking, think about analysis. So we try to model a system and analyze a system. In systems thinking, we act. We're much more focused on action because we can't possibly model a system. So, but through action, we learn. Objective is some objectivity. That's something that we value in traditional modeling. Normativity, that we recognize that we want to create the future. Once again, future, far more agentic, that we need to recognize that there is some normativity in the work that we do. If we are objective analytical thinkers, we believe that there is no normativity. And once again, that's questionable, but that's not a question I want to go to right now. Okay, so the weaknesses of systems approaches, and I am not going to tell you those other than they're not hard, so they don't give you an answer. It really is unsettling we don't have an answer. But I was just going to pose that question. I'm going to stop sharing now and take a question or two from the audience. So who's got it? Joseph, Daniel, Deanna, Ebert, any good questions that you want to ask?
We have one question from, and I apologize for pronunciation, Fritjof Wegener, on a possible third way. Are you still here to ask the question?
Yeah, I am.
Hello, Fritjof. He's a good friend of ours in our community.
Yes, it's a bit windy here. I'm sorry. So I'm wondering, is there a way to combine the two perspectives? Kind of like in between hard systems and soft systems, like a firm systems that's neither completely hard nor completely soft?
I don't have an answer, but do you?
I have a suggestion. Hard systems modeling as heuristics instead of prediction.
Say someone else jumped in, and so I'm going to let Fritjof finish, and then whoever jumped in, we're going to get to you. So Fritjof first. Do you have any thoughts on? I don't know what firm systems.
Yeah, I was just playing with words. But I think there's a way to combine these perspectives. And so let me take the example of modeling. So I'm also against seeing models as representation of the world. But I think still the act of modeling is useful as long as the model turns out to be useful. I think there's a way in between, but I just don't see it with the constructivism. But no, I don't have an answer, but that's why I'm wondering.
Yeah, it's sort of like Fritjof, the murmuration of starlings, just love that imagery. We can't model the murmuration, but we can understand some of the system structures and possibly nudge the murmuration into a certain direction. And so it's a very different paradigm that's different from anything that we've known. So modeling is almost something that we have to let go of when we take a systems lens. And that's hard. It's really hard because modeling gives us comfort because it can control the world and reduce uncertainty. But I'm going to let the other person who jumped in speak. I'm sorry I didn't catch who that was.
This is Frank Schlichter. I jumped in. There was a pause. I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize for that. But I was to Wagner's point. Forgive me if I've tortured your name. It occurs to me when I was hearing his question, when he's asking about a middle way, because I was asking myself that question too. It seems to depend on the purpose of the modeling. And even though I would concur with, it makes sense, everything you're saying about the limitations of the hard systems for approach, it seems like it could still be useful in its imperfection, and not pure folly. If we were to treat hard systems modeling as heuristics, if our goal is, for example, just to, even in the smallest way, improve, cognitive processing at different levels of a social system, you could have tools based on hard systems modeling that simply help the fragility of the human minds involved in these things. And you could probably pursue that through longitudinal studies to see if it actually helps improve performance or organizational behavior. That was my thought. It depends. So to the answer to this question, is there a middle way? It depends on the purpose of the modeling. And it seems like there could be a middle way where you take a quasi hard approach without trying to pursue, all the perhaps intrinsic aspirations of hard modeling.
What I really like about what you've said, though, is I think that hard and soft systems and traditional science actually have a place in our world, and I think that they each contribute different things, and we have to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of each, and use the approach that best suits the purpose that you have. And I think I'm skeptical of things that try to do both, but recognizing that if you know what your approach to research it takes and its limitations and its strengths, then you use that approach, but you complement it with other approaches rather than trying to find a middle ground. So in a soft systems lens, I think it can be complemented by a hard systems approach, but they're two very different paradigms. So don't try to muddle them together, I guess is where I'm going. I'm going to keep going. Oh, sorry. No, please.
No,
Yeah.
I was going to ask if we had time for one more, but we'll keep it going.
We do.
Then.
Let's do one. No, let's do one more.
Okay, I'll invite Slavomir. I'm sorry for last name Wiślak, if you're able to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. But which one, actually? Because
you have the floor, so pick your best question.
Yeah, so my question, thank you for the opportunity. So it's a really great presentation. So my question would be, how centralization of a system does affect the resilience of the system? With the centralization, I mean, how decision, let's say, are concentrated centralization in the system. Yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, that's a fabulous question. And so if you look at some of the socioecology literature, if you have top-down decision making, that can actually create a lot of instability in the system. And we know this. We can see this with governments, with fascist governments, when they make decisions, it can actually alienate, isolate, hurt people within the system. The most resilient systems are when they're bottom up. And so that allows for birth and death to happen at the bottom level, which then starts to lead to the emergence of the top level. And so across scale. And so the most resilient systems are when you have, let's say, community-based engagement that will change government. So democratic political systems are actually really quite resilient and can be quite good if well run. And then you only want top-down. I'll give an example of this at the very end with climate change. When you have top-down changes that can be really quick, but it's like taking a huge hammer that can create a lot of damage. You don't know what the consequences will be. But because a soft systems perspective says that you should have nudges and experiments to understand the system, you go from the bottom up. And that's why political theorists are often use a soft systems lens, because they tend to be much more community-based in terms of their engagement. Great question, though. I'm going to.
Tima, you're on mute.
I just muted myself. Sorry. I pressed mute instead of share screen too often. I'm going to keep going, then finish the presentation hopefully in about 10 minutes and talk about, oh, shoot, there's a couple more slides. Systems-based theorizing. One thing I want to do is to give you confidence that many of you probably have the systems lens already. If you use any of these theories right now: socioecology, pragmatism, critical realism, bullwhip effects, scenario analysis, design, foresighting, dynamic capabilities, social network theory. They're actually systems theories in management, even though they sometimes blur with a more analytical lens. But they apply a lot of systems principles, if not quite significantly. And consistent yet more distant is institutional theory and social movement theory. That there are ways in which they too embrace a lot of the things I'm talking about. And so recognize that I'm not saying that we haven't done systems theorizing in management studies. It's just that we don't tend to think about it through a systems paradigm, and that's what I'm advocating. Okay. So keep going. Systems approaches methodology. So how do you do it? I think that with hard systems, we tend to use agent-based modeling, causal loop modeling, temporal scale modeling. There's various ways in which we can do it. I'm not a systems dynamic person, but that's the sort of things that we use with hard systems. Soft systems, more qualitative methods, configuration analysis is actually quite consistent with soft systems and pragmatism. And then there's also a more performative lens that I think become important, and that's design. That's very much about the future. And I think that we have to actually perform into the future to create that climate resilient, desirable future that we want. And that takes much more of a design lens, which is still, at least in the strategy area of management studies, is still very much on the periphery. And I'd like to see much more of that. It just doesn't fit so well with a science orientation. That's why I think that it's been marginalized. Oh, so many of you probably know about the spaghetti tower experiment. This is really quite fun. So you end up with, and I don't remember the specifics, but like a yard of tape, lots of spaghetti, lots of marshmallows. And people have to, the whole rule is to get a marshmallow at the very top in the highest possible tower. So then the question is, who does it best? And they have, it's been done many times, you have kindergarten kids doing it versus MBA students. And who do you think performs better? Now, most of you will probably know the answer if you know this experiment, but it's the kids that perform better. And I apologize once again for the background noise here. So the difference is that the MBA students do the, plan, do, check, act. And so they work out the various structures that you can do, and then they start working on it. So, but the kids, they just all get in there and they're all got their grubby hands in this space and they're building things. And some things work and some things don't, and they collapse. But on average, this is what's really fascinating, is that the kindergarten kids, they build towers that are 26 inches, an American experiment, 26 inches tall, whereas the MBA students, on average, 10 inches tall. The plan, do, check, act of science arguably doesn't do as well as the kids who just move, make mistakes, small mistakes, and eventually get to the place that we want to get to. So they're the ones that win. So I take all that philosophy and I put it together into something we call Innovation North. We have Sylvia Grewatsch here, we have Lisa here. I'm sure that maybe some of my other people are here. That's an amazing team that we put together. Oh, I know Maya is here too, I saw her. The Innovation North is a research practice collaborative where we try to embed systems thinking into innovation and working with the community of practice. This is truly engaged scholarship. And so what I want to do is to say, and corporations want this as much as we do, is that they recognize that their planning approach can't get them to what they want to get to. And they say, let's take a systems approach. But very few of us know what to do with it. We just don't know how to embed systems thinking into corporations because it hasn't really been studied. So I said, let's study it. Free Talk is also involved with us too. And so we built we built not a model or framework, which is what we do in our management studies. What we did was a tool, and design thinking is a tool. Porter's 5 forces is a tool. We have tools that are already out there, but what we've done is embed deeply systems thinking into design thinking to say, how can we design for the better future? I want to make sure I don't run out of time. I only have 10 more minutes, so I'll keep going. So we're innovating for a better future. We're doing it with a bunch of firms in Canada. And so there's some companies that you might recognize, like BASF. We have General Motors as part of our group. We have SAP, JLL. And so we're trying to say, how do we embed systems thinking into organizations so they innovate for the future we want? And this is our group of, I have a small operations team. We have a bigger research team of postdoctoral and doctoral students. And here we have Elise. I don't know who else might be on the call. We also have research partners, and these are faculty members elsewhere. Some of them are former postdocs, Sylvia being one of them, Friedhoff being another one of our extended research team members. I want to give you the example of a circular built environment. When we think about a circular built environment, this is with my postdoc, Liz Miller. We often think that if we move to sustainability, we have to move towards circularity. That means that the waste of one company starts to move back into the industrial system. So it doesn't end up in landfill, but goes back and is used again and in a different form by other firms. And that was what we mean by circularity. Just don't create waste through the real world. And so how do we do that? So we did what we needed to do, going back to this compass, is to understand the problems, build awareness, and map the systems, ideate, and then act. I just want to show you where we came to. So as we were working through this and we mapped the system, what we realized, this is a map of the system. And it's complex, but believe me, it was far, far, far more complex than it used to be. And this is the flow of actors. And these are in the gray boxes, those are the ones that enable the actors to do their jobs. So these are the NGOs, educational institutions, educational institutions, standards associations, etc., governments that sit at the top that allow these actors, the colored boxes, to do their work. And then if we want a circular economy, that would mean that the buildings, and when they're destroyed, all the materials go back either into renovations or go back into the buildings. And the red print, which I know you can't read, are the reasons why circularity hasn't worked. So what we normally think about a system, going to the circular system or towards sustainability, we think about this, that the climate transition requires often, this is the top-down approach that we're just talking about, this Lawwell mentioned. Top-down approach means geoengineering, that we would either increase reflectivity in the oceans through micro bubbles, we could spray sea salt in the clouds, we could have all these other materials, reflectivity of props. I've heard that we could put large pieces of aluminum on the Swiss mountains. That's top down. That's going to create unintended consequences. That's very scary. But when we map the system like this, we recognize that we have to allow the enabling conditions to work first. Then we have to actually build new buildings in different ways. That's a project, real project activities. And then we have to celebrate small wins. And we do that in increasing circles so that we increase the number of actors that are involved with each move and increase the number of activities these are core activities that will move us to circularity. That's a very different way of approaching systems change and management studies than what we've done in the past. I think that's it. I would love in the chat to hear what were your questions or surprises. And then the team that's supporting me here will pick out some people to talk to. And there is my address, email address, and LinkedIn. And I'm going to stop sharing. that's it. A few questions.
There's one question from Philip earlier, Philip Passing. Are you able to ask that question?
Yes, thank you very much for this great input. I personally do research on corporate sustainability and related tensions, so applying a paradox perspective, concrete. And I really wonder why literature on sustainability is more influenced by social constructivist approaches to sustainability, and there's a lack of realist underpinnings, like strong sustainability approaches. And I wonder, what do you think? How can systems theory or approaches, concrete approaches within systems theory, help to place engaged research in mainstream literature?
Philip, I just want to make sure that you clarify what you mean by real or strong, because I think that you might have different definitions than I do.
There are the two concepts in general between or differentiation between weak sustainability and strong sustainability. I don't know if
Right,
you.
and that's a different paradigm. So strong
Yeah, right.
sustainability is a very different approach to sustainability, whereas weak is just business case for sustainability. But then
Right.
you said real, and I'm not sure if I understand
Yeah,
where
like
that fits.
for me, it feels like the social constructivist or the weak approach to sustainability is more like somehow social constructivist, because the triple bottom line that underlies this understanding is somehow just explaining a feeling of how sustainability could look like. And we have these three bubbles, but they are not really representing an integrated view of sustainability. And then you have the strong sustainability paradigm, which is underpinned by thermodynamics primarily. So I wonder if this, for me, it represents a realist approach to sustainability, because you have like more this real world influences you consider to understand sustainability. And on the other hand, you have the weak approach.
I think, Philip, our understanding of weak and strong is different. To me, an Indigenous worldview is actually strong sustainability. And an Indigenous worldview has an epistemology that just sees the world very different, but they interact very much in the natural world. And so I'm not sure that one is more constructivist than the other, but I do think that there's an absence in the current management literature of the natural environment. So if that's what you're saying, I totally agree with you. And I think that if we move towards this interdisciplinarity that I called for, that we would be talking to the ecologists and the thermodynamics, chemists and the physicists. And that would make our discipline and our ability to handle sustainability truthfully much more real. Yeah.
Yeah, I would really like to contribute to this with my research, and I wonder, or I'm actually approaching a systems approach, like the coupled human and nature systems approach. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I want to introduce this in the research to have a more like interdisciplinary perspective. And I wonder if you could give some tips or hints how to integrate the systemic perspective, or in which stage of my paper or something like that, which makes it more promising to introduce this or integrate the systemics perspective in top management journals, for example.
So Philip, why don't you reach out to me offline? If you got my email address, and maybe we could take that. I would love to have that conversation and learn a little bit more about your perspective as well. Okay?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip. So I'm going to let my moderators tell me what next we have. One thing I did actually, I'll just interrupt. I did tell my moderators that in 1 minute, maybe, that we are to officially end. I'm happy to stay here for 15 more minutes. So if you leave, don't feel bad. I won't feel bad then. And if you want to stay and ask a few more questions, I'm happy to take a few more afterwards, okay?
Yushi Zhao has a question. Are you able to ask that question?
And
Yes,
Anya, I see your
several.
hand up, Anya, so maybe you can put your question into the chat and then the moderators can choose to. Sorry, Yushi, go ahead.
I remember I have asked several questions. I don't really remember which one you're referring to. Can you kind of give me
You know, your most pressing question that you have right now, what would you like to ask?
Okay, great. So I'm thinking about like the hard system, the soft system, and also I know that, for example, the natural ecosystem, for example, we can use satellite image, remote sensing, and geographic information system to model it and make predictions. I know that human beings are more complicated than animals, like trees, that kind of thing. But I'm thinking about, is this a good idea, for example, to use mixed method? First of all, we can use something like the satellite image geographical information system to model the human environment interaction. And then we pick the things that cannot be modeled. And the things that cannot be modeled, I think the juicy part. We start from the phenomena and start from the things that cannot be modeled. And then we build new theories based on that. So it's kind of like a combination between the hard systems and soft systems. So we begin from the things that cannot be modeled by the hard system. Of course, the hard system, not just econometrics, but more of a high frequency data, for example, remote sensing, satellite image, NASA data. And then we begin from the things that cannot be modeled and create new theories. Do something such as you mentioned that anthropology, that kind of thing. So do you think that's a good idea to do research that move forward for junior scholar, just get started?
Yushi, I love that. And when I think about hard systems, and I told you that data are almost always historical, just by definition or design, right? Once it becomes a number or even text, it's something that's already happened. We can learn so much from the past, and to model the past has real value. So I use often in my presentations this wonderful simulation of climate or temperature changes of the Earth since the Industrial Revolution. Or I just showed you the En-ROADS simulation, which is based on historical data, that's super helpful in helping us understand that trees, planting more trees, aren't really going to make a huge difference. If we, though, want to create the desirable future we want, we need to use soft systems. So we learn from the old systems, the hard systems, this wonderful GIS modeling or whatever that you're thinking of doing. I love applying new methods. And then saying, okay, then where do we take that data? So recognize the limitations of what you are doing and what it can say and embrace that. So I'm not dismissing hard systems, but if I want to create a climate resilient or sustainable future, then I also think very, very much about the future, and hard systems can only take us so far.
I really love
really
that.
great question.
Yeah, I also really love your innovation north because I'm teaching at Concordia, just at Montreal, very close to Ivey, and I was there during the last 2 months with you. So is there any kind of short-term or long-term or any informal or formal kind of collaboration opportunities? Because I just drive to your Ivey Business School is very, very close. Yeah.
That's really good to hear, and a fellow Canadian too. So send me an email, Ishi. I'd love to correspond some more.
Yeah, I'll definitely send you an email and we will follow up. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Christian, I think I see you in the screen there.
Yes, so thank you very much for this great presentation, Tima. I am a fan of systems thinking. I was trained in system dynamics, but I think something that is very off-putting to sort of push for these methods, personally for me, is that it gets a lot of pushback, right? It's difficult to publish this kind of stuff. So my questions for you was, how do you see, what are the challenges and also opportunities for developing theoretical contributions, you know, using soft systems, for instance? What kind of recommendations can you give us to sort of push for this, and also to aim to publish in
Christian, where do you what's your field? Where would you normally?
So I'm in a business school and I study the formation of markets for sustainability.
I quite honestly, I think that if you've got good methods, if you've got really good methods and it's good theorizing, you will publish in the top journals now. And I was an associate editor and a deputy editor at AMJ for far too long. And I know that there's a huge appetite now for really opening up the opportunity set for the types of work that we do. We even had a special issue on new ways of seeing that had far too many conventional papers that were submitted to it. We have a special issue coming out in JOM. I keep hoping it will be this week or last week, but anyway, a special issue in JOM that's asking for proposals for papers rather than actual papers, because we realize that papers take so long, especially in qualitative work, to develop. And by asking for proposals, then we can work with the authors in really pushing the novelty. So I think that now more than ever before, if you do good work, it will be published in our good journals.
Thank you very much.
Anya, I believe you had your hand up earlier. Would you be able to share your question? And if you are able to turn on your camera while you ask.
Hi, thank you very much, Tima. Sorry, I can't switch on my camera right now. My question is to do with you mentioned performative, and you talked about design when you were talking about some of the methodologies. And I just wondered if you could maybe speak a little bit more about that and give some examples, please.
The methodologies for performative or design lens. Is that right, Anya?
Yeah, so on your slide that had methodologies at the top, you mentioned qualitative under soft, and then you had performative, and then you had design as a sub-point.
So I am somewhat out of my depth, Anya, when I talk about design, but there are design schools out there, right? And what is design? We can design a building, an architect designs a building. We can design social systems or cities, so we have urban planning. We have this design is very much about the future. So how do we design something for the future? We don't actually talk about designing organizations. And it's interesting, I don't know if Friedhoff is still on this call, but Friedhoff used to say he does organizational design. So what's that? Because I think about design as organizational structure, but design, as in the way that Friedhoff and others talk about from design schools, is very much about what do we create for the future. When you think about, there's nothing in management theories right now, but I think that's changing quickly. That's about the future and how we actually create the future that we want. Now, I know that people like Ali Gumazeh, Juliana Reinica, Luis Martins, Violona Rendova, they are doing work on futurizing and understanding how to create this future. But that we don't really know how to do. So what my short answer maybe is to look at design studies, which is in a really different world. So that's about foresighting, futurizing, rather than forecasting, which is what we do. But I'm sorry, I am really just a tourist or just scratching the surface myself and learning as I go, but hopefully giving you some directions.
Yes, thank you.
Gina has a question.
Hi, Tima. I think it's been 549 days since you sent me a response email and I have not responded. So it's great to see you and great to see this presentation today. Just to jog your memory, I think you remember I'm at McGill and I've been working on the architecture profession since it was my profession. And I have
And you had multiple children. I remember that
twins.
too.
Yes, exactly. I had twin boys, everything. Thanks for what an incredible memory, Tima. And so I'm wondering about how do you kind of get your committee or your supervisor, to consider a systems lens approach? Like obviously Anna Kim's here and she's incredible and she's teaching that at so many levels, but it's hard to kind of help I think particularly my supervisor get the head around the fact that this is the right way, you know, like my theoretical contributions, it's nested, you know. But what do you think, like, what is the kind of dynamics you think that matters in that kind of relationship? Like, what are the, yeah, I'll leave it and let you answer.
Yeah, you know, Gina, you know that this is being recorded, so we have to be really careful because I forget now who your supervisor is.
Sorry, I forgot that
let me just
too.
talk about let me just talk about it in a very general way, is that because it's so new, whenever a doctoral student is pushing the frontier of new methodologies, it's really, really important for them to be serious about it. And then I think that most supervisors, certainly can't speak for all, most supervisors are really open to good work. And so I think if you can sort of find this connection to what they are doing, to the systems work that you want to do, and then also see if you can't find someone else like Anna, like me, like anybody else who's doing systems work. There's so many good people on the call, that you can bring them into your committee. And so then it gives sort of like that grounding and that legitimacy, because it's really scary. I think when I did sustainability work, you know, like I said, I did this in the mid 1990s. I started in the early 1990s, and sustainability was just born in '87. And if you think about at that time, everybody was talking about strategy as an economics-based paradigm, that it was all about organizational performance. And I said I did environmental stuff, and people are saying, why? So, and now it's just like it's everywhere. And I think that when you're at that front edge, as long as people are assured that you're passionate and that you know that you're going into a world that may not have assured success, they're a little bit more comfortable. But I think that every supervisor wants good work, wants good things for their students.
Absolutely.
And so if you can figure out a way of saying to them, this is really what I want to do, this is a way of doing it legitimately, maybe by having co-supervision or someone on your committee, and I'm willing to not win. and then that sort of, those are ways to at least manage the supervision. But I still think you should win too.
Sure.
Gina, you're doing really cool work.
I think, especially now that I'm at the end of my field work, you know, I've seen the architecture profession, this edge group really pushing the edge for sustainability. And I've seen the academics, you know, really bringing that forward. And then there's just this middle piece of the profession that kind of holds it back, right? And so I think this is the right perspective for it. I think it is, absolutely. So thank you for your time. And I will send you an email 549 days later.
Love the fact that you calculated the days. Thanks, Gina.
Tima, can we take one more question? Let's invite Noreen, who just put one in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Tima. Thank you for your presentation, although I arrived late. I'm a second-year PhD student at Trinity Business School, and I'm looking into researching human resource management systems in SMEs, particularly in terms of its impact on organizational resilience. So I'm interested in picking out systems theory and contingency theory as theoretical lenses, because they are quite encompassing as opposed to what the other scholars have done, which would focus only on either on internal aspects or external aspects. So my question would be, I'm just wondering, actually this morning, on the fact that systems theory is quite encompassing in nature, and yet the scholars in my field aren't using them. They just use some of the related theoretical perspectives you have enumerated earlier. Yeah, thank you. So I'm just curious on why don't they use directly the systems theory?
I don't have an answer for that. I think that there's maturity that comes to fields. And for example, when I first started out, institutional theory was very much in sociology, hadn't really penetrated management. And right now it's just like, it's overwhelming management in some ways, right? It becomes the a very, very strong theoretical lens, and we have parsed it now into so many different areas that I no longer feel like there's much to add. Systems is on the other end of that spectrum, or sorry, in the place that institutional theory once was. But the thing about systems theory, which I love, that's not true with many of the other theories that we use, is that it's interdisciplinary. And being an interdisciplinary orientation, I think allows us to have this conversation across fields and learn from them. So I listen to the Santa Fe podcast, even though they're hard systems theorists. I listen to all sorts of fields where I can learn from biology and ecology. And I think that there is something super powerful when you're dealing with sustainability issues, especially, that will allow us to tackle some of these big world wicked problems or grand challenges, whatever you call them. And so my systems lens, to me, is so deep and so wide, and there's so much opportunity to contribute, that we're just seeing the front edge of this wave. And I am so, I have to say, so reassured that we had over 200 people on this call, that there is a point in time right now. I think this is that point in time where people have shown an interest in this, and they're frustrated with the world that we've created, wanting to create something new, and saying that a systems lens could possibly give us points of view on that. So, and many of you, not all, but many of you are young scholars. And so there's hope for our future, actually, I think, with the systems lens. So yeah, keep pushing and don't question it. Just do good work. And hopefully we'll have more and more symposium at your various conferences. I'm an AOM, Academy of Management person. I'm going to EGOS this year. If you're a systems person, knock on my door. I'd love to hang out with you. But I think that there is a real interest in this. Amanda, Ju Young, and I have a PDW at EGOS. If you're going, please attend. So there's these sparks are happening, and soon there'll be a fire. I know it.